You're not my mama!
The 3-year-old scream ripped through the coronation ceremony, and every wolf in the throne room froze. Little Aelin didn't run to her father, the Alpha King. She didn't run to Callista, the woman who'd just been crowned Luna, who stood there in white and gold, hand extended, smile cracking. She ran to the Omega kneeling in the corner. The servant in the torn apron. And she sobbed into her arms like the world was ending. Mama Freya, please, don't let her take me. Gasps exploded across the court. The new Luna's face twisted. And the king rose from his throne, because what his daughter just exposed will burn this kingdom to the ground. If stories like this remind you why love and truth matter more than crowns and politics, subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles, because we're just getting started. Aelin stumbled backward past the elder council with their shock-white beards, past the rows of noble wolves in their ceremonial furs, past her father, Alpha King Thornwolf himself, seated tall in his black-furred mantle with his crown gleaming under the stained-glass light. His confidence faltered as his daughter's desperate cry cut through the air. "You're not my mama." And then Aelin did something that made every wolf in the kingdom freeze in absolute, suffocating disbelief. She ran. Not to her father. Not to the royal guards or the noble ladies who'd tried to comfort her these past weeks. She ran straight across the marble floor toward Freya, the lowly Omega who worked in the laundry halls, kneeling instinctively in concern, her apron frayed and torn, and collapsed into her arms, sobbing like her entire world was ending. "Mama Freya," Aelin choked out, tiny fists gripping the worn linen like a lifeline. "Please, please don't make me go with her." The throne room erupted. Gasps rippled through the court like shockwaves. Whispers exploded. One elder stumbled backward, hand pressed to his chest. And Callista, perfect, poised, politically flawless Callista, went rigid. Her practiced smile cracked just enough for the court to see the fury blazing underneath. "Give me the child," Callista demanded, her voice losing its honeyed warmth. "No." Freya's arms instinctively tightened around Aelin, even as her eyes went wide with terror. She tried to release the pup, tried to obey, but Aelin clung harder, nails digging into fabric, face buried against the Omega's shoulder. "She's frightened," Freya whispered, voice trembling. "Please, my lady, let me just." "You will not speak," Callista snapped, her mask slipping further. "You're an Omega. You have no authority here." That was when Thornwolf rose from his throne. The room fell silent under the weight of his alpha presence. His dark eyes, usually warm when looking at his daughter, were now fixed on the scene before him. On Callista's barely concealed rage. On Freya's protective embrace. On his daughter's tear-streaked face pressed against a servant's apron. "Enough," Thornwolf's voice boomed, echoing off the ancient stone walls. "Order." "No." But his eyes never left Freya. Never left his daughter's terror. What happens next will unravel every secret Amberfall tried to bury. 3 moons earlier, Alpha King Thornwolf had stood at the edge of the royal crypts with Aelin clutching his leg, both of them watching as Seraphine, his beloved mate, Aelin's fierce and gentle mother, was laid to rest beneath the ancient oaks. Seraphine hadn't just died. She'd sacrificed herself defending the borderlands from a rogue invasion, standing between her people and slaughter. She'd saved thousands. She was a hero. A legend. A queen who'd ruled with both strength and tenderness. Thornwolf had wept silently, his massive frame shaking as he held his daughter close. And Aelin, too young to understand death but old enough to feel the emptiness, had simply whispered, "When is Mama coming home?" According to the ancient laws of the Wolf Kingdom, after a respectful mourning period, Thornwolf would need to choose a new Luna. For the stability of the crown, the council insisted. For the allied packs watching our borders, the commanders urged. For little Aelin's sake, they whispered with false concern. But 3 moons? 3 moons was barely enough time for Aelin to stop waking up screaming. 3 moons was nothing, a blink, a heartbeat, a cruel joke played by tradition and political desperation. Callista of High Peak had arrived with impeccable timing. Daughter of a powerful allied alpha. Beautiful, educated, regal, and ruthlessly ambitious. Where Seraphine had been all warmth and wild laughter, Callista was cool calculation and controlled elegance. Where Seraphine had spent mornings braiding Aelin's hair and teaching her to identify healing herbs, Callista spent mornings at her vanity and afternoons networking with the Elder Council. She saw Thornwolf not as a grieving widower, but as an opportunity. The courtship had been swift and strategic. Callista moved through the court like wildfire, charming the elders with practiced grace, impressing the military commanders with strategic insight, somehow managing to be at Thornwolf's side during every moment of weakness. She'd brought him reports when he worked past midnight. She'd organized royal banquets with effortless precision. She'd smiled at Aelin with rehearsed warmth whenever Thornwolf was watching. But children see things adults miss. Aelin had grown quieter with each passing week. The vibrant, chattering little girl who used to skip through the palace halls had become subdued. Withdrawn. Her laughter, once as common as sunlight, became rare. And in the evenings, when she thought no one was looking, she'd slip away to the servant wings. To find Freya. Freya had been an Omega in the Amberfall court for nearly a decade, performing the quiet, invisible labor that kept the palace running. She mended garments, brewed healing teas, baked bread that made the whole palace smell like home. And she had loved Seraphine like a sister. They'd been friends long before Seraphine had married the Alpha King. And Seraphine had never let hierarchy poison their bond. She'd brought Aelin to the laundry rooms for tea and laughter, teaching tiny hands to fold linens and thread needles. After Seraphine died, Freya had been one of the few people who'd held Aelin while she cried. Who'd never told her to be brave but simply let her grieve. So when Callista had begun her campaign to become Luna, Aelin had gravitated desperately toward Freya's gentle presence. The laundry halls became her sanctuary. But today was the coronation ceremony. Today, everything was supposed to be perfect. Except Callista had made one fatal mistake. Just before they'd entered the throne room, she'd leaned close to Aelin and whispered words meant only for the child's ears. "We don't need to pretend anymore, darling. Once this crown touches my head, you'll learn to obey me. No more running to servants. No more tears. And you will call me mother, whether you want to or not." The mask had slipped. Just long enough for Aelin to see the truth. Now, as the court stood in shocked silence, as Callista's composure finally shattered, as Thornwolf descended from his throne with slow, deliberate steps, little Aelin clung to Freya with trembling hands. Thornwolf knelt beside them, his voice softening. "Aelin," he murmured, reaching out carefully. "Little pup, why are you so frightened?" Aelin's tear-streaked face turned toward him. And she opened her mouth to speak. If you're already invested in what happens to Aelin, Freya, and this broken kingdom, just hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. And drop a comment telling me what time you're watching this. I love knowing when this story finds you. Aelin's voice came out small and broken. She said she'd make me forget Mama. The words hung in the air like poison. Thornwolf's jaw clenched. His eyes, those fierce alpha eyes that had commanded armies and negotiated treaties, softened with dawning horror as he looked at his daughter's tear-stained face. What else did she say, little pup? But to understand what Callista had whispered, you have to understand how she became the woman kneeling in that throne room in the first place. The council had given Thornwolf no choice. Or so they'd made him believe. The kingdom cannot stand without a Luna, Elder Maddox had insisted 2 moons after Seraphine's funeral. The southern borders grow restless. The allied pacts are watching for weakness. You must stabilize the crown. Thornwolf had wanted to rage at them. Wanted to tell them that his mate's body was barely cold in the ground, that his daughter still woke screaming every night, that he was drowning in grief and they were demanding he replace the irreplaceable. But he was an Alpha King before he was a father. Before he was a man. And Callista of High Peak had arrived with a solution wrapped in silk and strategic advantage. Her father controlled the mountain passes. Her Pax alliance would secure trade routes and military support. On parchment, she was perfect, educated in court politics, trained in diplomacy, beautiful enough to satisfy tradition. She will stabilize your rule, the council promised. What they didn't say, what Thornwolf had been too grief-blind to see, was that Callista was ice beneath all that silk. The cruelty had started small. A week after her arrival, Thornwolf had found Aelin crying in the nursery. Callista stood over her, arms crossed, face cold. "Tears are weakness," Callista had said calmly when Thornwolf entered. "If she's to be a future queen, she must learn control." "She's 3 years old," Thornwolf had replied, scooping Aelin into his arms. "She's allowed to cry." Callista had smiled, that practiced, patient smile. "Of course. Forgive me. I only want what's best for her." But the moment Thornwolf left the room, the warmth evaporated. Aelin's toys began disappearing, replaced with etiquette primers and posture drills. Her afternoon play sessions became lessons in proper royal deportment. And when Aelin mentioned her mother, when she asked to hear stories about Seraphine or wanted to visit her grave, Callista's voice would sharpen like a blade. "Your mother is gone. I am your Luna now. You will call me that. Not I'll try to honor her memory. Not I know you miss her. Just cold erasure." Aelin had tried. She'd tried so hard to be good, to be quiet, to stop crying when Callista told her tears were unbecoming. But a child can only pretend for so long before something inside them breaks. That's when she'd started slipping away to the servant wings. To Freya. The first time Aelin had found Freya after a nightmare, it had been an accident. She'd woken screaming, calling for her mother, and had run through the darkened palace halls until she'd stumbled into the kitchen. Freya had been there, kneading dough for the morning bread, and she'd simply opened her arms. No scolding. No demands for silence. Just gentle hands and a soft voice humming a melody Aelin recognized. "That's Mama's song," Aelin had whispered, hiccuping through tears. "It is," Freya had replied, pulling the child close. "Your mama used to hum it while we worked. She said it made the bread rise sweeter." Aelin had clung to her, breathing in the scent of cinnamon and flour and something that felt safe in a world that had become terrifying. After that night, she'd come back. Again and again. Freya would teach her to knead dough with small, clumsy hands. Would let her taste the honey before it went into the tea. Would hold her when the grief became too heavy and simply let her cry without judgment or timelines for healing. And weeks before the coronation, when Aelin had curled up in Freya's lap after another nightmare, she'd whispered the words that made Freya's heart shatter and soar all at once. "You feel like Mama, Freya. Not you're my new mother. Not can you replace her." Just an acknowledgement that this gentle Omega with her worn apron and patient hands had become something precious. Something safe. Freya had known she was overstepping. Every time Aelin slipped into the kitchens, every moment she spent comforting the royal heir, she was violating the rigid hierarchy of pack law. Omegas served. They didn't nurture. They didn't form bonds with royalty. She'd hidden their time together, terrified of punishment. Terrified that someone would see how much she'd come to love this broken little girl. Terrified that they'd see the other truth she'd buried deep in her chest. That somewhere in the quiet moments, in the late nights when Thornwolf would find Aelin in the kitchens and would stay to talk, to remember Seraphine with the only other person who'd truly known her, Freya had begun to feel something she had no right to feel. Something that made her heart race when he smiled. Something that made her ache when she saw his grief. Something utterly, completely impossible for an Omega to feel for an Alpha King. So she'd stayed silent. Stayed in her place. Loved Aelin from the shadows and told herself it was enough. Until the morning of the coronation. Callista had found Aelin in her chambers, already dressed in her ceremonial gown, clutching a small ribbon that had belonged to Seraphine. She'd knelt down, smile fixed, and pulled the ribbon from the child's hands. "Listen carefully," Callista had whispered, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "In a few hours, I will be Luna. And you will obey me. You will stop this pathetic crying. You will forget your mother, she's gone and she's not coming back. And most importantly..." Her fingers had tightened on Aelin's small shoulders. You will not see that Omega again. Not in the kitchens. Not anywhere. Do you understand? Aelin's eyes had filled with terror. Mama Freya is a servant, Callista hissed. Nothing more. And if you embarrass me during this ceremony, I will make sure she's sent away where you'll never find her. Now, standing in the throne room with the court erupting around them, with Thornwolf's eyes blazing with barely contained rage, with Freya trembling as she held the sobbing child, Aelin lifted her tear-streaked face and spoke the truth that would shatter a kingdom. She said if I cried, she'd make Mama Freya go away forever. The court gasped. Callista's face went pale. And Thornwolf's wolf surfaced in his eyes, gold bleeding into dark, as he slowly stood and turned toward his so-called Luna. The silence that followed Aelin's confession was suffocating. Every eye in the throne room turned toward Callista. The newly crowned Luna stood frozen, her white gown suddenly looking less like elegance and more like a shroud. Her carefully constructed mask cracked wider, revealing the fury beneath. That is absurd, Callista said, her voice sharp as broken glass. The child is confused. Overwrought. She doesn't understand what she's. She understands perfectly. Thornwolf's voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded storms. My daughter may be young, but she does not lie. He moved with deliberate slowness down from the dais, each step echoing through the vaulted chamber. The nobles parted like water before him. When he reached Freya and Aelin, he did something that made the entire court hold its breath. He knelt. The Alpha King, sovereign of Amberfall, commander of armies, ruler of wolves, knelt on the cold marble floor to meet his daughter's eyes. Aelin, he said softly, cupping her tear-stained face with one large hand. I need you to tell me everything. Can you do that for me? Aelin hiccuped, her small body still trembling against Freya's chest. But she nodded. She said I had to forget Mama. That Mama was gone and I wasn't allowed to talk about her anymore. The words tumbled out between sobs. And she said I was weak for crying. That future queens don't cry. And she made all my toys disappear and said I had to practice being proper instead of playing. Thornwolf's jaw tightened with each revelation, but he kept his voice gentle. What else, little pup? She said. Aelin's voice dropped to a whisper. She said after today, I couldn't see Mama Freya anymore. That she'd send her away if I didn't behave. That Mama Freya was just a servant and I had to forget her too. The court erupted in shocked murmurs. Thornwolf's eyes, now burning with gold alpha fire, lifted to Freya's face. The Omega was pale, visibly shaking, but she hadn't released Aelin. Hadn't tried to escape or deflect. Is this true? He asked her. Has my daughter been coming to you? Freya's throat worked as she swallowed hard. Protocol demanded she lower her eyes, bow her head, apologize for overstepping. But with Aelin clutching her apron, with those tiny hands gripping like a lifeline, she found strength she didn't know she possessed. Yes, my king, she whispered. After Queen Seraphine passed, Aelin began coming to the kitchens. She was grieving. I never sought to overstep my station, but I couldn't turn her away. I loved your mate like a sister. Helping her daughter felt like honoring her memory. Lies. Callista's voice cracked like a whip. She took a step forward, her composure fully shattered now. This Omega has been manipulating your daughter against me from the beginning. She's poisoned the child's mind, filling her head with stories, making her dependent. I never spoke against you, my lady, Freya said quietly, but firmly. I only offered comfort when Aelin was hurting. You had no right. Callista shrieked. You're an Omega. You serve. You don't form bonds with royalty. You don't. Enough. Thornwolf's alpha command rolled through the throne room like thunder, forcing every wolf present into instinctive submission. Even Callista stumbled back a step, her tirade cut short. He stood slowly, his full height and power radiating through the chamber. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with a grief that had nothing to do with Seraphine and everything to do with the failures of the living. "When did I stop seeing you, Aelin?" he asked, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. "When did I become so consumed with duty and politics that I missed your suffering? When did I stop being your father?" "You were sad," Aelin whispered. "I didn't want to make you sadder." The simple honesty of it broke something in Thornwolf's chest. He'd been so lost in his own grief, so buried under the weight of ruling a kingdom, that he'd failed to protect the one person who mattered most. He'd let ambitious nobles and political necessity blind him to his daughter's pain. He'd almost bound himself, and Aelin, to a woman who saw them both as nothing more than stepping stones to power. And it had taken a 3-year-old child and a lowly Omega to show him the truth. "You're right, Callista," Thornwolf said, his voice cold as winter stone. "There has been manipulation in this court. But it wasn't from the Omega who comforted my grieving daughter." He turned to face her fully, alpha power radiating from every line of his body. "It was from the woman who whispered cruelty to a child. Who demanded my daughter forget her mother. Who threatened to separate Aelin from the only source of genuine comfort she'd found. Who smiled to my face while breaking my daughter's heart behind closed doors. Thornwolf, you're making a mistake. Guards." His voice echoed through the chamber. "Remove the crown from Callista of High Peak. The engagement is ended. The coronation is void." "You can't do this." Callista's voice rose to a shriek as 2 guards approached. "My father will hear of this. High Peak will not stand for this insult. You'll lose our alliance, our support. Then we'll stand without it." Thornwolf's words were final. "I will not trade my daughter's well-being for political convenience. I will not bind myself to someone who treats a grieving child with cruelty." As the guards reached for the crown, Callista's beautiful face twisted with rage. She turned her venom on the easiest target. "This is your fault," she hissed at Freya. "You pathetic, scheming little Omega. You'll pay for this. When my pack. You will not threaten members of my court," Thornwolf growled, his wolf rising to the surface. "Escort her from the palace. Now." The guards moved swiftly, removing the crown from Callista's head as she screamed threats and accusations. The court watched in stunned silence as the woman who was meant to be their Luna was dragged from the throne room, her white gown trailing behind her like broken dreams. When the doors finally closed, silence fell again. Thornwolf looked down at his daughter, still clinging to Freya. At the Omega who'd shown more care for his child than he'd been able to see through his grief. At the 2 people who'd somehow found each other in the darkness while he'd been blind. Gently, he lifted Aelin into his arms. The child came willingly but kept one small hand fisted in Freya's sleeve, unwilling to let go completely. "Freya," Thornwolf said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You will come with us. To my private chambers. We need to talk." Freya's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded. "Yes, my king." If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, hit subscribe, because what happens in those chambers will change everything. Comment what country you're watching from, and let's see how far this story reaches. The private chambers felt smaller with the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. Thornwolf set Aelin down gently on the cushioned window seat, though she immediately reached for Freya's hand again. The Omega stood rigidly, her eyes fixed on the floor, every line of her body screaming discomfort of being in the Alpha King's private quarters. "Sit," Thornwolf said softly, gesturing to the chair beside Aelin. "My king, I shouldn't. Please." The word, quiet, almost broken, made Freya's eyes snap up in surprise. Alpha Kings didn't say please. Not to Omegas. But Thornwolf's face was raw with emotion, stripped of royal composure. She sat. Thornwolf knelt before them both, making himself small, making himself level with his daughter's tear-stained face. "Aelin," he began, his voice rough. "I failed you. Your mother died protecting this kingdom, and I was so consumed with grief and duty that I forgot my first responsibility was to protect you. I let strangers pressure me into decisions that hurt you. I didn't see your pain. I didn't listen. And I am so sorry. Aelin's lower lip trembled. You were sad. I didn't want to bother you. You could never bother me, little pup. Never. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. From now on, I see you first. Before councils, before politics, before everything. You are what matters. When he released her, he turned to Freya. The Omega had gone very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And you, Thornwolf said quietly. Freya. I owe you an apology as well. You were there for my daughter when I wasn't. You gave her what she needed most, genuine love and comfort, and I was too blind to see it. Thank you. For honoring Seraphine's memory. For honoring our daughter. I never meant to overstep, Freya whispered. I should go. This will cause scandal, my presence here, the court will. I don't want her to go. Aelin's voice rose in panic. She lunged for Freya, wrapping small arms around the Omega's waist. Please, Papa, don't make her go. Aelin, sweetheart, Freya tried gently. No. Aelin pulled back, her silver eyes blazing with the same fierce determination her father possessed. Everyone keeps trying to give me new people. New mommies. New ladies to teach me things. But I don't want a new mommy. Mommy's in the stars like Papa said. I don't need someone to replace her. Her voice softened, grew honest in the way only children can be. I just want people who love me because they want to, not because they have to. People who don't pretend. She looked up at Freya with absolute trust. Mama Freya doesn't pretend. She feels like home. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Thornwolf's throat tightened. Out of the mouths of children comes truth adults complicate beyond recognition. Freya, he said carefully. Seraphine spoke of you often. She called you her truest friend. But I realize now I never asked, what did she say to you before she died? Freya's eyes filled with tears. She made me promise something. What? She asked me to watch over Aelin if anything happened to her. She said. Freya's voice broke. She said her daughter would need someone who remembered her laugh, who knew her stories, who could keep pieces of her alive when the kingdom tried to turn her into just a legend. Thornwolf felt something crack open in his chest. And you kept that promise. I tried. I never meant to cause trouble or overstep my station, but when Aelin came to me crying, I couldn't turn her away. Seraphine would never have forgiven me. No, Thornwolf said softly. She wouldn't have. And neither will I, if you leave now. Freya's eyes widened. I'm not asking you to replace Seraphine, Thornwolf continued quickly. No one could. But Aelin needs you. And I'm asking, officially, if you would serve as her companion. Her guardian. Be there for her the way you have been, but with the court's recognition. With my protection. The nobles will never accept. Let me worry about the nobles. Freya looked at Aelin, at those pleading silver eyes, and felt her resolve crumble. If Aelin needs me, then I'll stay. Aelin's face lit up like sunrise. The court, predictably, erupted. Within hours, the whispers had started. An Omega given authority over the royal heir? Unthinkable. Improper. The elders questioned Thornwolf's judgment. The warriors muttered about tradition. The noble families worried about precedent. But Thornwolf stood firm. And slowly, something unexpected began to happen. In the quiet evenings when Aelin woke screaming from nightmares, it was Freya who held her, rocking gently and humming Seraphine's lullaby. And it was Thornwolf who found them there, who sat beside them, who learned to comfort his daughter by watching how Freya did it, with patience instead of commands, with presence instead of solutions. They would talk in those late hours. About Seraphine. About grief. About the woman they'd both loved and lost. And Thornwolf began to see what Aelin had seen from the beginning. Freya's strength wasn't loud or commanding. It was steady. Unshakable. The kind of strength that showed up day after day, expecting nothing, giving everything. The kind of strength Aluna needed. One evening, 2 weeks after the disastrous coronation, Thornwolf found himself watching Freya teach Aelin to braid bread dough, both of them laughing when it fell apart. The sound of his daughter's joy, real, unforced joy, was something he hadn't heard in months. Freya looked up, caught his gaze, and blushed. And Thornwolf felt something shift in his chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. That night, as he was reviewing reports in his study, a sharp knock interrupted him. Elder Maddox entered without invitation, his face grave. "The council demands an audience, Your Majesty. Tomorrow at dawn." His tone was cold. "They wish to discuss the improper influence of the Omega on your household. And your judgment." Thornwolf's jaw tightened. "Tell them I'll be there." As the elder left, Thornwolf stared at the closed door, his wolf stirring restlessly beneath his skin. The fight for Freya's place in his daughter's life, and perhaps in his own heart, was just beginning. If this story is hitting different, subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles so you don't miss the battle that's coming. These next chapters? They're going to test everything. Dawn broke cold over Amberfall, and Thornwolf entered the council chambers with his wolf barely leashed beneath his skin. The room was packed. Not just the elder council, but noble families, military commanders, pack representatives, all gathered to pass judgment on a single Omega who dared to care for a grieving child. Elder Maddox stood at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. "Your Majesty," he began without preamble. "We gather today to address a matter of grave concern. The improper influence of an Omega on the royal heir threatens centuries of tradition and the very foundation of our hierarchy." Improper? Thornwolf's voice was dangerously quiet. "My daughter has finally stopped having nightmares. She smiles again. She eats. She plays. Explain to me what's improper about that." "The method, Your Majesty." Lady Cordelia, a noblewoman from an old bloodline, spoke up. "An Omega forming emotional bonds with royalty sets a dangerous precedent. She's manipulating the child's affections." "She's doing nothing of the sort," Thornwolf growled. "Then let her speak for herself." Elder Maddox's eyes gleamed. "Summon the Omega." The doors opened, and Freya entered. She wore simple servant's clothing, no attempt to dress above her station. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid. She walked with her head high but her eyes respectful, and when she reached the center of the room, she bowed deeply. "You stand accused," Elder Maddox intoned, "of overstepping your rank, manipulating the royal heir, and attempting to influence the Alpha King through his daughter. What say you?" The room fell silent. Freya's hands trembled, but her voice came out steady. "I never sought rank or recognition. I never asked for anything beyond the privilege of keeping a promise to a dying queen." She lifted her eyes to meet the council's gaze. "Queen Seraphine was my friend. When she died, she asked me to watch over Princess Aelin. To help her remember her mother's love. That's all I've ever tried to do." "A convenient story," Lady Cordelia sneered. "With the queen dead and unable to confirm it." "I can confirm it." Every head turned as old Helena, Seraphine's former handmaiden, now retired, stepped forward from the crowd of observers. "Queen Seraphine did make that request. I was there." She knew Freya had a gentle heart and trusted her with her daughter's grief. Helena's voice wavered but held firm. "This Omega has done nothing but honor that trust." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered dissent. Commander Brock, a battle-scarred warrior, stood abruptly. "This is madness. We're actually considering legitimizing an Omega's authority over the air? What's next? Servants sitting on thrones. This undermines everything our hierarchy stands for. Several warriors rumbled agreement. She has no authority, another noble added. She should be sent back to the kitchens before she poisons the princess's mind further with ideas above her station. Ideas like kindness? Freya's voice cut through the noise, surprising even herself. The room went quiet. Ideas like honoring the dead? Like comforting a child who lost her mother? She took a breath, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. I know my place. I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am. But if loving a grieving child is a crime, if keeping a promise to a dying queen is manipulation, then I'm guilty. Her voice softened. But I won't apologize for it. Well said, a voice called from the back, one of the kitchen staff. The Omega speaks truth, another servant added. Then, shockingly, Elder Gareth, one of the oldest council members, nodded slowly. The girl speaks with honor. Perhaps we've forgotten that true leadership isn't about rank. It's about service. Ridiculous. Commander Brock slammed his fist on the table. You'd elevate a servant because she's good with children? This sets a dangerous. She's not a servant. The small voice silenced the entire chamber. Aelin stood in the doorway, having slipped past the guards. Her little face was fierce, her silver eyes blazing with her father's fire. Mama Freya isn't just a servant. She's kind and she remembers my real mama and she doesn't pretend to be something she's not. Aelin walked forward, small but utterly fearless. And if you sent her away, you're all mean and I don't want to be a princess in a kingdom that's mean. The simplicity of it struck like lightning. Thornwolf looked at his daughter, then at Freya, and something crystallized in his mind. True Luna qualities weren't about bloodlines or political connections. They were about service. Compassion. Loyalty. Truth. Everything Freya had shown from the beginning. Everything Callista had lacked. Enough debate, Elder Maddox declared, though his expression had softened slightly at Aelin's words. This matter requires a formal decision. I call for a council vote. The room went deathly still. The question before us, should this Omega be officially recognized and elevated to a position within the royal household, or should she be removed from the princess's life entirely and banished from court? Thornwolf's heart stopped. Freya went pale. And Aelin reached for Freya's hand, holding tight. All in favor of removal and banishment. If you're holding your breath right now, subscribe so you can breathe again. Comment keep Freya if you're on her side. I want to see how many of you are ready to fight this battle with her. All in favor of removal and banishment. 3 hands rose. Only 3. Elder Maddox's eyebrows lifted in surprise. All in favor of recognition and elevation. Hands rose across the chamber. Elder Gareth. Helena. Several servants who'd crept in to witness. Then, unexpectedly, Commander Brock's second-in-command. Then Lady Cordelia's own daughter. She honored our queen, Elder Gareth said quietly. That deserves recognition, not punishment. Even Elder Maddox, after a long pause, raised his hand. The vote wasn't even close. By council decree, Maddox announced, his voice carrying the weight of tradition bending to truth, Freya of the Laundry Halls is granted provisional status as royal companion and guardian to Princess Aelin, with the possibility of elevation pending the kingdom's acceptance. Aelin's squeal of joy echoed through the chamber. Freya's knees nearly buckled, but Thornwolf was there, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Don't thank me yet, he murmured. This is just the beginning. That evening, in the quiet of his private chambers, Thornwolf finally spoke the words that had been building in his chest for weeks. I'm falling in love with you. Freya froze, the tea she'd been pouring nearly spilling. My king. Thornwolf. Just Thornwolf. He stepped closer, his expression raw and honest. I'm not asking you to replace Seraphine. No one could. She was my mate, my heart, and I'll carry her memory until I return to the earth. Then what are you asking? To build something new. Something honest. His voice softened. You've shown me what true strength looks like. Not dominance or ambition, but steady, quiet courage. The kind that shows up every day, expecting nothing, giving everything. That's what Aelin needs. That's what I need. Freya's hands trembled. I'm terrified. So am I. He smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him in months. But I'd rather be terrified with you than comfortable with someone who doesn't truly see us. I see you, Freya whispered. Both of you. Then will you stay? Not just for Aelin. But for us? The answer came not from Freya, but from Aelin, who'd been sleeping in the corner and now launched herself between them. Say yes, Mama Freya. Say yes. Freya laughed through her tears and pulled the child close. Yes. The ceremony 3 days later wasn't grand or political. No foreign dignitaries. No elaborate gowns. Just the royal family, the loyal staff, and the elders who'd supported truth over tradition. Thornwolf placed a simple silver circlet on Freya's head, not gold, not the heavy crown of state. And woven through it were wildflowers, the same kind Seraphine had loved, picked by Aelin herself. This isn't about replacing what we lost, Thornwolf said softly, his hand covering Freya's. It's about honoring it by building something true. Freya looked at Aelin, beaming in her little dress, then at Thornwolf, his eyes full of hard-won hope. Then let's build, she whispered. The kingdom of Amberfall began healing that day. Not because they'd forgotten their fallen queen, but because they'd chosen to honor her by protecting what she'd loved most, her daughter's heart. Far to the north, in the mountain halls of High Peak, Callista received word of the ceremony. Her face twisted with rage as she penned a letter to her father. The war for Amberfall's throne had just begun. But in the palace, wrapped in silver and wildflowers and honest love, Freya, Thornwolf, and Aelin stood united. And for the first time in moons, they were home. If this story reminded you that love isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, then subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles. We've got more tales of hearts that refuse to break and families that choose each other. Drop a crescent moon in the comments if you stayed till the end.
Hey beautiful soul. Can I just say thank you? Thank you for staying with Aelin, Freya, and Thornwolf through every heartbreak and every hope. Stories like this, they're not just entertainment for me. They're about reminding us that love shows up in the quietest ways, that family isn't always blood, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose honesty over perfection. If this story touched something in you, if you felt Aelin's tears or Freya's courage or Thornwolf's redemption, then I created this for you. And honestly, it means the world to me that you were here. Now, I have to ask you something, and I'm asking from the heart. Have you told me where you're watching from yet? Because I love knowing that this story reached you. Whether you're curled up in bed in Manila, commuting in Lagos, or having coffee in New York, drop your city or country in the comments. Let me know you were here. Let me know this story found you. It genuinely makes my day when I see your names pop up. And here's the thing. If Aelin's story got you in your feelings, wait until you see what's coming next. I'm talking about a story so intense, so beautifully chaotic, that you won't believe where it goes. The next one? It's waiting for you right now. Just click on that thumbnail showing on your screen. Don't let this be the last time we meet. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. With so much love. Silver Moon Chronicles.